What's going on, Internet? Just in the Model Y here, in the commute, and I have some thoughts about a very important book that I read. Pretty awesome book by James Arbib and Tony Seba called Stellar. So I can present it to both cameras. This book is incredible. And it's a very optimistic book about the future of renewable energy, the future of humanity, a future of abundance. I would say that as a whole, what this book is proposing is a future of fully automated luxury communism, which I think is something that, like, other people online, different like spaces in the internet have speculated about as well, that we might be headed to, as we have abundant clean energy in the form of solar, wind, and batteries, which forms the core of what they call a stellar energy system, because the proper point in what they created, which is called a U-curve in terms of the relationship between the cost of batteries, the cost of solar and wind, and the amount of battery capacity that we create together with the generation capacity of the solar and the wind, will fit somewhere on a cost curve of a U, and will lead to basically the periodic abundance and excessive production of electricity from the solar and the wind systems in our economy. So there'll be periods when it's sunny and windy, like it is all the time in Palm Springs, where we will have more energy than we know what to do with, and there will be whole new economies and industries, in particular like AI processing, both the AI training and the AI inference, that will emerge to exploit this glut of energy that will happen often periodically, because we only need to build up enough batteries to get us through the darkest and least windy parts of the year. So in all the other times of the year, there'll be an excess of generating capacity. That's what Tony Seba calls the superpower system. And superpower combined with AI and robotics, that's right on the cusp. I mean, I'm sitting in it right now in traffic on the freeway here in this this self-driving Model Y. I got a Rivian R1S recently, and the R1S is a fantastic car. It's probably the best car I've ever gotten, but it's still just a car. This Model Y is a robot with what it can do here on the freeway. And within 5 years, everyone's going to be riding around in Model Ys or cybercabs or robovans just like this. And the task of transportation, of driving from place to place, will be fully automated. And what will happen to the people who drive for Uber, Lyft, whatever, make a living as these drivers is a real open question. And that's what's going to happen to basically every job that's out there. Every part of the economy is going to be displaced by intelligent robots and AI. And the Andrew Yang thesis from 2018, the war on normal people, it's increasingly coming true. Like this system right here, this is the war on normal people intensifying. And something has to be done in terms of ensuring that no one is left behind. There doesn't become a permanent underclass of people. And the obvious solution that Tony Seba points to in a stellar future, a stellar economy, is the end of private property, the end of capitalism as we know it. And he makes the analogy of the extractive societies, which capitalism is the apex of, and then you could say feudalism or mercantilism came before capitalism, feudalism came before mercantilism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these different isms, right, were different forms of the caterpillar. So the caterpillar eats and eats and eats and gets bigger and bigger, And now with the emergence of solar, wind, and batteries, and the fusion of solar, wind, and batteries, and artificial intelligence, artificial labor, the caterpillar is going to reach a chrysalis phase where it can then gestate in the chrysalis and emerge as a butterfly. And the butterfly that emerges is what he calls a stellar economy, but if you really look at it closely, it's basically communism. And it makes a ton of sense to me. Like I've always thought like in an ideal world, communism makes a whole lot of sense. The problem is that with the guys who tried to implement communism in the past, whether it was Mao or Stalin or whatever, like my read of that is that the technology and the social evolution didn't exist because the technology behind it didn't exist. Like there were still too many scarce resources, whether it was labor or fuel, energy, etc., in order for like the general human consciousness to evolve to the point where we could participate in like a true communist society. But with the advent of superpower through solar, wind, and batteries, and artificial labor, with humanoid robots and factory robots powered by machine learning algorithms, we're doing a little lane change here. Man, it is becoming so human-like in when to do these lane changes. It's wild. But anyways, with where we're going with the convergence of those two technologies, and the abolition of most material scarcities because of it, like the whole thing of everyone will have everything that they want because robots will be able to make it, and the robots are powered by super abundant, sustainable energy, like no marginal use cost energy of solar and wind. We can reach a point where we can have like a communist society, a fully automated luxury communist society, because once you get to that level of abundance, there's no longer a question of like, oh, I need to have this because there isn't enough. Like I need to have this car because you can't. It really just becomes a question of the only reason, a core elite. That's what Tony Seba refers to them in the book as, and it's a great way to refer to it. Like a core elite, ruling class, billionaires, whatever, would try to hoard things, is not because there isn't enough to go around. Like there's a fully automated a production apparatus that can make everything, make every luxury good, every consumer good, every core necessity super abundant. So the only reason for people to hoard it is gonna be like some kind of not misogynist, was that term, like sadistic, some kind of sadistic instinct to hoard things for the sake of hoarding it, so that you can deny people. Like there's no longer a question of I need to have this because there isn't enough to go around. There's more than enough for everyone to have everything. And in that material situation, like there is no more need for like sort of capitalist thinking around allocating scarce resources, because that's what capitalism has proved to be, the most efficient system for allocating scarce resources. But now there's no more scarce resources, so what comes next? And it's a fully automated luxury communism. Maybe there will continue to be certain capitalist systems around the handful of things that remain scarce, those handful of things being like real estate, maybe certain tourist experiences, those sorts of things. But with regards to like the essentials that people need to live, food, shelter, energy, transportation, entertainment, it's all going to be completely abundant. And that's what the Stellar book breaks down and shows in a most optimistic outlook. And when I look at my thinking of where this stellar economy is most likely to emerge first, it seems to me like it could be one of the Gulf states, or Saudi Arabia. Like Prince MBS is a very controversial figure. He like dismembered that journalist Jamal Khashoggi back in the day, but he's also in an extremely desperate situation in terms of like, you know, he has a country, or he's inherited a country where his legitimacy to rule is entirely based upon his ability, the Saudi royal house's ability to provide material abundance to its citizens, and where material abundance doesn't satiate the needs of the citizens, like religious fundamentalism in the terms of like Wahhabi teachings, which was like, those were the core pillars of the founding of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? It was the House of Saud and the Wahhabi preachers who were their clerics when they were nomads fighting in the desert against the Ottomans, right? Like going all the way back to like the Lawrence of Arabia days, right? And that those Wahhabi jihadist teachings have like come back to bite them and the rest of the world in the ass over and over and over again, in terms of like that radical thinking gestates, you know, in pockets of Saudi Arabia, and then was exported to Afghanistan and the Taliban, and then into Al Qaeda, and then into the Islamic State, and blah 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 blah. And him as the first ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that came to rule not through the agnatic succession, because Saudi Arabia has this agnatic succession where instead of it being the king dies and then his son, the prince, becomes the king, instead the king dies and the prince, being his next oldest brother, becomes the king. So for a period of like 80 years or so, the kings of Saudi Arabia have all been, old brother dies, the next oldest brother comes to power, then the next oldest brother, the next oldest brother. So they've all been in the same generation. And MBS is the first person to come to power who is not from that same generation of dudes who were all sons of the founder of the country. He's the first grandson, and he's under 40. So, you know, there's a completely different thinking and outlook that he has to the world, in terms of like, he has to be forward looking, or he's going to have to be forward looking, where his predecessors, including his father and all of his uncles and stuff, weren't going to be. And like, you see that he's tried to implement driver's licenses for women in the kingdom, and is trying to move forward with this like Vision 2030 in terms of like embracing renewable energy and trying to create all of these tourist traps, like the Gulf states did, and you know, build up that line city and invest heavily into sports, the WWE and esports and stuff. And it all points to trying to find ways to placate his population, because his population is extremely young. Like, most of the people in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are under the age of 40, and I think even under the age of 30, and they're not really employable, but they're relatively well educated. They're not used to working super hard because they've always had like the oil money stipend, and the oil money stipend is inevitably going to run out. So when you look at all of these things together, like Saudi Arabia actually has a really terrible hand looking into the future. They've got all these different challenges with regards to like demographics, education, workforce, expiring resource, like what the expectations of the people are with regards to like what they want to live with and experience, and it makes like an intuitive sense to me that if any nation state level organization is going to make the jump all in to a stellar economy and a stellar sort of system with regards to making like solar, wind plus battery system super abundant, and then putting in millions of robo taxis and then millions of Tesla bots to fully automate their economy, and has the capital to do it, it's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or it's the United Arab Emirates, or it's one of the individual emirates in of themselves, like Dubai or Abu Dhabi or whatever, or maybe Qatar. But it's somewhere in that Gulf. There's like the confluence of desperate need, because these like the population expects to live pretty well and not go into having to be like wage slaves like most of the populations of other countries are, because they've lived for generations now of just being like fabulously wealthy off of like oil money. They're not going to want to become wage slaves when the oil money runs out, and they have the money now in order to make these crazy investments, and they've got all of the solar, and they've got the rare earth minerals to make the batteries, or to make some of the supply chain to make the batteries. So if someone is going to create a battery factory and a solar factory that's powered by solar and operated by robots, it's going to be in the Middle East, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because it's the only way that he can preserve his kingdom and not like implode into some like ISIS nightmare jihadi state. Because if he doesn't provide for the material, if Prince MBS is not able to continue to provide for the material needs and expectations of his kingdom, of his people, it's very obvious that that's what they turn to. They're going to turn to the Wahhabi teachings that their predecessors used to defeat the Ottomans and the British and the French 100 years ago. And that's kind of insane to think about, because they've been like the biggest providers and biggest purveyors of oil resources to this point. And it's also interesting to think of like the potential of what superpower could be used for in that desert environment, because once you have all of that excess solar capacity that comes periodically, like what do you throw it at? The guys in Rethink X point to the combination of AI and food production systems, because they fit together very well. The excess heat generated by the computers and the mainframes and supercomputing clusters can keep the precision fermentation vats at a higher temperature. But in that context, I think it's going to be desalination and fog harvesting or dehumidification to create fresh water. So you've got all this excess superpower in the middle of the day, and you just convert it right into fresh water, and you use that fresh water to irrigate your deserts. And you don't even necessarily, and you've already got these other systems that I've seen the Saudis and stuff like look into and experiment with, for making the pre-treatment of the saline water like slightly less saline. They're like these seawater agricultural systems where you can use salt water and ocean water to grow crops like salicornia. So salicornia, it's also called like the pickleweed. I have a friend who harvests wild growing salicornia in the reservoirs of his farm, and he sells it at farmers markets, calls it sea beans. It's just like this really salty thing. It's also called sea asparagus or salt asparagus or something like that. It's actually got like a pretty good flavor, and it's really nice for like seasoning things because it's got so much salt in it. But it's just a halophyte plant that can grow on ocean water. So you can set up large expanses of space next to the Gulf where they let the water in, and this salt water will irrigate and grow the Salicornia. You harvest the Salicornia as like cattle feed or whatever, but then after the water has wetted up the Salicornia, you could have it pass through there, and then the water that then passes through these Salicornia fields that comes to the other end, that's the water that you would intake to go into the RO system, because the Salicornia itself has already uptaked a certain amount of the ions, the nutrients, and the sodium and salt that's in the ocean water. So then the water that comes out on the other end of the Salicornia field is not pure ocean water. It's just like brackish saline water. So then your RO membranes have to work just marginally less difficult, less hard, in order to get the remaining ions out and give you fresh water. Another approach that they pioneered, that I've seen pioneered in the Gulf, there's this organization called the Sahara Forest Project, where their idea was to create saltwater cooled greenhouses, where basically you create these greenhouses, and they're like plastic hoops, like what we would use for growing blueberries and blackberries, like berry hoops. A lot of people use them for growing cannabis now. But you have those, and then you have a wet wall on one side. And a wet wall is basically a giant fan in front of dense corrugated cardboard. And you just you trickle water through the cardboard in front of that fan, and that fan blows, and it blows through the water, and it acts as a giant swamp cooler, right? So you've got a plastic hoop tunnel with a giant swamp cooler on one side, and that swamp cooler cools the greenhouse and cools and humidifies the greenhouse so that you can grow plants inside of it, right? Well, what the Sahara Forest Project figured out is that you can run salt water instead of regular water from the ocean through that corrugated board to humidify that greenhouse. And the humidification effect that happens, like the water vapor that dissolves out and humidifies and cools that greenhouse through that swamp cooler, is pure water. Like the salt gets left behind in the corrugated cardboard, and the water vapor comes out in the greenhouse, and then you just put a giant dehumidifier at the other end of the greenhouse to pull out your clean water, you know? And you can layer these systems into each other, so it just becomes like a caterpillar or a centipede of desalination technologies, where you've got these giant, you've got your, you know, the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea, and you got water coming in from the Red Sea into a giant constructed tidal floodplain, growing your Salicornia. And then after the water trickles through the Salicornia field, and you can also have mangroves growing or other halophytes growing, after it trickles through this Salicornia field, the water that comes out at the other end is slightly less brackish. You uptake that water, run it through the saltwater greenhouses that are maybe growing more conventional crops inside of them, or that through the saltwater greenhouses to cool them, and then you got the dehumidifier at the other end of the saltwater greenhouse, pulling the clean water, or like the desalinated water vapor that's in that air, creating fresh water. And then that fresh water can then water the plants that are in that greenhouse that might actually be like food crops. It could be like cucumbers or tomatoes or whatever. And if you expand this out enough, you could get an excess of desalinated water that you could then use to irrigate plants on the outside. You could irrigate your traditional xerophytes on the outside of that. It could be like acacias and mesquite trees, and you know, some blend of of cacti and succulents and euphorbias and stuff, and you start the process of revegetating your sandy desert dunes, and that would actually be like the perfect that would be like the perfect ideal plan for how to roll out a stellar economy, because now you're taking your superpower from your stellar core of solar, wind, and batteries and applying it to these regenerative technologies with the end goal of re-terraforming and revegetating your desert countryside, to turn your desert into functional ecosystem, probably into like a mixed savanna, and then into rainforest. And when I think about like best possible futures, really hopeful things for the future, for what we can do with technology, with artificial intelligence and superpower, it's cleaning up and revegetating vast tracts of this world, and revitalizing and restoring this world. And they talk a lot about that, or Tony Seba and James Arbib also talk a lot about that in their book, because the third technology that they're really bullish about, I'm a little more cautious about and more skeptical about, primarily because of my background in studying like permaculture and agriculture, is a new revolution in agriculture through precision fermentation. And they talk about like this, a triple Venn diagram of stellar energy, of solar, wind, batteries, artificial labor, and then precision fermentation. Precision fermentation technologies being able to create any of the proteins that we need, any of the fats that we need in giant vats. So what that system is you have you have genetically modified bacteria, yeasts. So what they figured out is you can use this gene editing technology called CRISPR-Cas9, which is like basically a copy edit gene for snipping genetic codes, and you use that to cut out like the genetic sequence that says produce this protein. Let's say it's a milk protein. So, you know, in the DNA of the cow, they figured out that this genetic sequence is a genetic sequence that causes the cow's organs to produce milk protein A. You take CRISPR, you copy that, or you snip that out, then you take that and then you insert that into a yeast or a bacteria, a yeast, yeah. The same yeast that is used to produce alcohol. So you remove the gene that has the yeast produce alcohol, and you put in the gene that makes milk protein A. And now when you put this genetically modified yeast into a giant vat, and then you feed it its feedstock, which is basically simple sugar, it takes the simple sugar, converts that sugar into milk protein A, and then you do this with milk protein B, milk protein C, milk protein D. You recombine all of these milk proteins A, B, C, D, and then into the proper ratio with some water, and now you've created molecularly equivalent milk. And there's a company called Perfect Day that's already doing this, and is not only already doing this and has been doing it for like 7 or 8 years, but they're now on the shelf of Target. And I found them on the shelf of Target like several weeks ago, where they were, you know, they're labeling Perfect Day, or it was called Bored Cow. Bored Cow was the product label, and on that label they had this little sticker. It said like the first animal-free dairy milk. It is like crazy, because it is a milk protein, exact milk protein, molecule for molecule, but it's been produced by precision fermentation bacteria and yeast instead of by a cow's udder. And you can apply that same technology to collagen, and you know, like I eat collagen every day. I think most people should. At this point, collagen derived from grass-fed beef is one of the cheapest proteins you can get, gram for gram, Like, it compares pretty well with the boneless, skinless chicken thighs at Costco. I did the analysis because I wanted to figure out how cheap I could get my protein while living on the road, right? Living on the road and really economizing. But if you can make collagen from precision fermentation, you can make it way cheaper than even from grass-fed beef or grass-fed cows. And it really calls into the question, like, the core of what agriculture is. But going back to the Stellar book, and Tony Seba in the Stellar book, he says that we will need 90% less land area for producing food because precision fermentation will completely displace animal agriculture. And I can see it. It makes intuitive sense to me. At the very least, I'm certain it will, and not only will, but it should displace agriculture it should displace feedlot animal agriculture. That is the style of animal agriculture which is a magnifying lens for grain production. Because most all animal agriculture today is like this linear system of, we take the fossil fuel, we produce the fertilizer, we produce the diesel, we put the diesel and the fertilizer into tractors, into land, grow corn, grow soy, harvest the corn and soy, take the soy to a giant feedlot and feed it to the cows there, then slaughter the cows, turn them into beef. Really complicated system for turning scarce fossil fuels into protein. And by every metric you can imagine, it is less efficient than raising cows on grass, the way that cows and other large herbivores have always, evolved in systems. By every metric you can imagine, it's less efficient, with the exception of labor and maybe land area. But there are different people who debate this. Like, you look at like works of Alan Savory or Soil for Climate people. I'm trying to remember the dude's name. He's there are a number of people in like the regenerative grazing community who've done a lot of research on this that I only know like a tiny little about. But when you look at all of the added steps of taking flat grassland, churning it up and turning it into a soy farm so that you can then harvest soy to feed it to a cow in a feedlot, like, it's very inefficient with regards to energy, with regards to resources, with regards to mechanization, machines, etc. But it makes the cow grow fast. It makes the cow's meat super fatty, which, like, consumers, what consumers at this point have gotten used to, and it's very easy to mechanize with 20th century technology. 20th century technology of the tractor, the combine, the diesel truck, versus, like, if you wanted to raise the same number of cows without tractors, without turning the land into a giant corn farm, and instead it was a prairie, you would need electric fence, you would need cowboys, you would need a ton of people working the land. So it's less efficient with regards to labor. But then when we have artificial labor, if you can make a robot cowboy or a robo herder, oh, that's a really cool Rivian right there. Hey, and it's got Illinois plates. That R1S, that black on black smoked out R1S came all the way here from Illinois, but I guess all the R1Ss came from Illinois because the R1S factory's in Illinois. Ha ha ha. I'm gonna have to check out the R1S factory when I'm on this road trip. It'll be cool. It'll be cool. But anyways, I think that's one scenario or one use case that Tony Seba and co haven't like thought of quite yet, which is like the application of robotics and AI into more traditional pastoralist type of animal agriculture. Because when it comes down to it, like perennial grasses and mixed prairie ecosystems are far more efficient at producing animal feed, ruminant feed, than corn and soy is. I think personally. It's just that we've never gone down the rabbit hole of fully analyzing if that's completely true, because of the labor component. Like the current system for raising cows that capitalism has developed of, what's going on here? I thought we're exiting in Baldwin. Oh no, we're still exiting. Wow. FSD was smart enough to get into the inner lane before exiting. Like it took the correct lane on the exit. That's something that FSD would not have done 3 months ago. Shit, it wouldn't have done it like 1 month ago. Man, this system's getting so goddamn smart. It's unbelievable. But anyway, yeah, if you wanted to raise cows on pasture and manage that pasture as intensively as you have to, meaning you're moving the cows like every day, maybe like 2 or 3 times a day, it requires an incredible labor quotient in order to make it work. Whereas you could have one dude driving a giant tractor and a giant combine, and a handful of dudes overseeing a feedlot and a cattle loading facility, But yeah, if you have robot cowboys instead, who can like wrangle the cattle, move them every 6 hours, every 8 hours, every 12 hours, so that their impact on the land is maximized, and then you also like optimize some amount of like supplementation for the prairie and the pasture, in terms of like you have some drones that come on and foliar feed the grasses and the prairie with like molybdenum and with like molybdenum and iron 3 and stuff, in order to increase their photosynthetic capacity so they can grow faster, and you really optimize for the grass's like recovery rate and regrowth rate. I think we would be able to produce a tremendous amount of animals on the same land that is currently being used for corn and soy farming. But that's just my personal little hobby horse that I like to think about, because the ideas of managed intensive grazing, of regenerative grazing and permaculture and stuff, like I've spent years, decade at this point, of those ideas like marinating in my mind, and there aren't many people who are interested in both permaculture, regenerative agriculture, and artificial intelligence, robotics, technology. It's like a weird combination, because when everyone who's into artificial intelligence, robotics, they're futurists, like super forward thinking, and they because of that, they tend to think of older systems as outdated, quaint, and as having little to no value. And then on the other hand, people who are really into permaculture and regenerative agriculture tend to be like very retro thinking, or not retro thinking, they tend to be very backwards looking and thinking like all the solutions to humanity's problems are, if we could go back to like before the technology, before the internet, tend to become like almost Amish in a sense. So what I like to think is, I like to think of like a sort of techno retroism, or like a retroactive technologism, where if we apply like super sophisticated technologies that are coming to what were previously thought of as older, outdated systems, but are actually surprisingly efficient and ecologically synergistic, we could find some unexpected gains, and robotic cowboys on intensively managed grazing systems is one place. Anyways, I have arrived at my good friend's urban farm here, and that's all I got to say for you guys. Peace.